No letters for 3 weeks. The thought hammered through Susan Marie Caldwell's mind as Ray Charles began the opening notes of Love Me Tender at Norfolk Scope Arena on October 18, 1973. The 28-year-old Navy wife had been sitting quietly in the 14th row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to convince herself that this concert would somehow make the crushing weight of 8 months without her husband feel lighter. But when Ray's voice filled the arena with the same song that had been her first dance with Lieutenant Commander James Caldwell, the song that had played at their wedding reception just 2 years ago, Susan's carefully constructed emotional walls came crashing down in front of 18,000 strangers. 3 weeks. 21 days since the last letter from Vietnam. 21 days of checking the mailbox every morning, with the desperate hope that only military families understand, and finding nothing. 21 days of her 6-year-old daughter Emma asking when is Daddy coming home, and having no answer. 21 days of lying awake every night, listening for the sound of a car door that might belong to 2 uniformed officers bringing news that would change everything forever. Susan buried her face in her hands as Ray's voice washed over the arena, but the tears came anyway. 8 months of being strong for 3 children. 8 months of managing everything alone while James fought a war that felt increasingly meaningless to everyone except the families sacrificing for it. 8 months of pretending that the constant fear gnawing at her stomach was just part of being a good military wife. But to understand why Ray Charles would make a decision that had never been made before in the history of live entertainment, you need to know about the letter Susan had written to James that morning and hidden in her purse. The letter she was too afraid to send because it told the truth about how much she was struggling. The Norfolk Scope Arena was packed with military families from the massive Norfolk Naval Base. Wives like Susan who were trying to find a few hours of escape from the constant anxiety of deployment life. Children excited to see a real star perform. The few servicemen on leave who could afford the tickets and wanted to give their families a special night out. Ray Charles had specifically chosen Norfolk for this tour stop because he understood something that many entertainers didn't. Military communities deserved the same quality entertainment as major cities, and they needed it more than most. The stress of deployment, the constant fear, the economic pressures of military life. Ray had seen how music could provide temporary relief from burdens that never really went away. But tonight was different. Tonight, as Ray moved through his repertoire of hits, he could sense something in the audience that went beyond the usual excitement of a live performance. There was an undercurrent of tension, of shared anxiety, that he had learned to recognize in military communities. These weren't just fans enjoying a show, these were people carrying weights that civilians couldn't understand. Susan had come to the concert reluctantly. Her sister Margaret had driven down from Richmond, insisting that 8 months of waiting for news from Vietnam was turning Susan into a ghost of herself. Margaret meant well, but she didn't understand that military wives didn't have the luxury of falling apart. There were children to feed, bills to pay, households to manage, and the constant responsibility of being strong enough to hold everything together until their husbands came home. If they came home. The letter in Susan's purse had taken her 3 hours to write that morning. She had started it 17 times, crumpling up draft after draft because she couldn't find words for what she was feeling. How do you tell your husband, who is fighting for his life in a jungle on the other side of the world, that you're drowning? How do you admit that the woman he married, the woman who promised to be strong while he served his country, isn't sure she can do it anymore? Dear James, the final version began, I don't know if you're alive, and that not knowing is killing me slowly. Emma asked me yesterday if Daddy was ever coming home, and I realized I don't know how to answer that question anymore. I'm scared all the time. I'm angry at this war, angry at the Navy, angry at myself for not being stronger. I love you more than my own life, but I need to know you're okay. I need to know this nightmare is going to end. She had sealed the letter that morning, addressed it to his unit in Vietnam, and then sat staring at it for an hour before finally tucking it into her purse without mailing it. How could she burden him with her fears when he was the one in danger? How could she tell him she was falling apart when he needed to focus on staying alive? Now, as Ray Charles sang their wedding song to 18,000 people, Susan felt every word of that unmailed letter burning in her chest. The melody that had once represented the beginning of their life together now felt like a funeral dirge for everything they had lost to this war. Susan tried to leave quietly, standing up during an instrumental break and attempting to slip past the other audience members in her row. But as she reached the aisle, something made her look back toward the stage. Ray Charles had stopped singing mid-verse. He was standing perfectly still at his piano, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something only he could hear. "Hold on just a minute, folks," Ray said into his microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "I'm sensing something out there in the audience tonight, something that needs addressing before we continue." The arena went quiet. 18,000 people turned their attention to Ray, who was now walking to the edge of the stage, his movements careful but purposeful despite his blindness. "There's pain out here," Ray continued, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Real pain. The kind that comes from loving someone who's far away and not knowing if they're okay. The kind that comes from being strong for so long that you've forgotten how to let yourself feel scared." Susan froze in the aisle. It was as if Ray was speaking directly to her, as if somehow he could see through the darkness of his blindness, straight into her breaking heart. "Ma'am," Ray said, turning toward her section of the arena. "Yes, you in the aisle. The lady in the blue dress, would you come down here please?"